Hello and welcome everybody to today's edition of The View from the Top, a special edition. And once again, I'm joined by Julia Onslow-Cole of Fragomen. And also we've got a couple of special guests, and I'll introduce you to those in a moment. But anyway, Julia, great to see you. And
thank you.
And thank you everybody for being on the show. We really appreciate having you here. Let me just update you a little bit on the show from where we were last week. Last week we had 5,000 people viewing the show. That's just incredible. And the response was amazing. Both Julia and I think you'll agree, Julia, we got emails and messages of support and thanks, and people saying that, in these really difficult times, it's great to have a way of, sharing information. So thank you, Julia. Thank you in advance to our guest, who I'll introduce you to in a moment. But thank you to everybody there in LinkedIn world for taking part. What we really want is everybody who's listening. Please, can I ask you to join the conversation? We want to know that you are out there. So please, can you just say hi, just say where you're from. If you've got any comments, feed the comments in. You've got any thoughts, you want to share any discussion. It's really important so that we know exactly what's going on in LinkedIn world. That would really be something that we would find helpful. So please do join the conversation. Also, you'll find on your live stream there's a like button. Please do use that as much as possible. If somebody's saying something you agree with, then hit that like button. You can hit it as often as you want. Write the comments, and also share. If you're finding it useful, please share this broadcast as it goes live, because we want to get it out there as widely as possible. And our commitment back to you is that we're going to be back next week, and we're going to be back here the week after. And Julia and I have agreed that we're going to do a show at this time, 3 o'clock UK time, 10 a.m. Eastern time, every week on a Wednesday for as long as we need to deal with any of the issues that people are facing around the world, be they immigration, be they other areas of global mobility. But we're going to be here to cover all those issues, and we're going to keep on having guests on the show to talk about their perspectives. Julia, anything you want to say?
No, that's great.
Okay, well, let me just carry on. Just a couple of things that came out of last week, which I think are were really important. We had a lot of feedback from people. Some of the issues we're going to make sure we address. That questions what people are asking, we're going to make sure we address on the call. We address on the call later on. But there are two specific things that I wanted to mention. The first was that somebody on the show last week, I think from memory, was a lady called Shani Morris from a company called Remedium Partners, which is a recruitment agency that specialises in bringing in doctors to the UK for the NHS from overseas. She raised the issue about immigration problems, getting people into the country or indeed out of their own countries at a time when obviously the country needs doctors more than ever, and there's problems with the mobility of doctors. And Julia very kindly offered on behalf of Fragomen to help Remedium to lobby the authorities to see if we can get any special treatment. And I know that started, and that's completely on a pro bono basis. So hats off to Julia, and hats off to everybody at Fragomen.
Well, I have to say it's my colleague Siobhan Owers, who heads our medical practice, immigration practice. So she's dealing with all of those cases. So yes, it's good.
Okay, and then the second issue that came out of last week, and something that we've been working on at Benivo, but I just wanted to share with you, is that I know a lot of you will know Benivo, and not everybody, but we produce a tool that helps employees connect with each other and connect with their employers and share information and learn from each other. What we've decided to do is we've launched a special COVID-19 update tool, which we're making free. This is free to anybody, whether they're a client of Benivo or not a client. And this will allow your assignees to share information with each other, because quite often assignees have got specific concerns. For example, you might have, I don't know, trying to think of an example, Indian software engineers in Paris. They might be getting information at the moment in French from their local HR department, but actually what they want to know is from other people in the same boat, where, for example, might be a good place to buy, to buy food, to get delivery, to get, visa issues, all sorts of information. And we're doing a tool on that. And hopefully, I think we're going to collaborate with Fragomen a bit on that too, in terms of putting some of your updates there. But if anybody's interested, do message me, because I said we are going to offer this as a completely free tool to anybody, client or non-client. Anyway, I can see from LinkedIn World, we've already got loads of people coming in and saying hi from all over the world. So thank you, everybody from on LinkedIn who's listening in. Please do keep those comments coming. Please do keep saying hi. So we're going to go deep dive in a moment. But first of all, I'd just like to introduce our guests. Our first guest is Tim Potter. Tim is a senior immigration and compliance specialist at IBM, and obviously IBM is one of the most prestigious companies and largest programs in the world. So Tim, welcome to the View from the Top and this special edition. I don't know if you could just say a little bit about yourself as well, just by way of introduction.
Hey Brian, thanks for having me on today. It's a pleasure to be here. I do work for IBM. I've been in mobility for quite a long time now, and my current job is the manager of global immigration operations and our business travel compliance team.
Cool, and thanks a lot. It's great having you on the show. And our other guest today, get up here, is Jill Pawley, and Jill Pawley is the EMEA Mobility Manager for Arup, one of the largest and most prestigious architecture and engineering firms in the world. But Jill, perhaps you just say a few words yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to be here this afternoon. Yes, as Brian said, I lead the UK, India, Middle East and Africa team for our region. I've been in the industry in one form or another for over 20 years now, so seen it from a number of different sides, including having been an expat myself with my family.
Okay, thanks a lot. We've got people from all over the world, just looking at the comments coming in. London, North Carolina, Madrid, the Bay Area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Philadelphia, the Netherlands, another one from New Jersey, Germany, Virginia, Phoenix, Chicago. So, I mean, people are coming in from all over the world. Now, many of you are in, should we say, hotspots at the moment. I'm thinking particularly of people in Spain, in Italy, indeed in London and New York. And if you're experiencing things yourself, do please feel free to share your thoughts. We'd love to know, your perspective and ask any questions. But what I'd like to do to kick off is maybe I could just ask Julia just to give us an update on some of the trends that she is seeing. And then maybe last week we did a bit of a global tour de force of various major places around the world, and you updated everybody. I appreciate that this is so rapidly moving. So maybe, Julia, you could just start off by just telling us a little bit about, first of all, some of the global trends that we're seeing, and then maybe go into some of the regions of the world. So, Julia, why don't you kick off?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I think over the past week, we've seen three main global immigration trends. The first is we've seen a huge increase in containment measures, these increasing quarantines and lockdowns, and these have been strictly enforced in many countries, which has created compliance issues, not just for the assignees, but also for companies. The second trend that we've seen is that the governments are increasing concessions for extensions, because government officials all around the world are having great difficulty with their limited capacity working from home. So they've had to increase concessions. And the third point is that we've seen, alongside these stricter quarantine measures, there's been a whole new raft of requirements that are sitting alongside the ordinary immigration requirements, such as health certificates. And what we expect is that this third trend will actually develop into a kind of new normal, and that many of these new requirements, such as the health certificate and details of where you've previously travelled, will continue when people begin to mobilise. So just turning to Asia Pac, since last week, there was a very big change in China. It came on Friday afternoon, and the change was implemented on Saturday, and China has now closed its borders. Only Chinese citizens and those with permanent residence or residents of Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan can enter China. And the exception is for people who are doing necessary economic, trade, scientific, or technological activities. What we've also seen since last weekend is a measure of control that's being exercised by China consular posts throughout the world, and they're putting a number of applications on hold. So we have had very good discussions with the Chinese authorities, and from those discussions, we believe that this picture will continue for 3 months. And as you may recall from our discussions last week, it's all in relation to the concern about this second wave. Now, last week I said that Wuhan will be lifting its lockdown on the 8th of April for those with a green code on their smartphone. And what the authorities have done is gradually release those restrictions prior to the 8th of April. So they're actually on the ground. You can see them, the restrictions gradually being lifted. Hubei province, the restrictions are very much more lifted. Those people that have to return to China, who can manage to get through all the difficulties because of the flight restrictions, are still very strictly being enforced in quarantine. And I raised the case last week of an expat that was arrested in Beijing when she went out for a jog. And it's very, very important that you tell the assignees to obey the quarantine rules and also have accommodation available for people. Otherwise, they will be put into a government accommodation. Moving now to Singapore. Last week, I explained that Singaporean citizens and those with permanent residence can enter Singapore, but they are subject to a stay-at-home notice. And if you're coming from the US and the UK, you have to serve that out in a hotel. I think some of the assignees have actually been put up in 5-star hotels, and they're rather excited, but their meals are actually being issued by the government. So they get 3 meals a day. Then the other thing to say is that everyone else on work visas and dependent passes, they require pre-approval. And these are only really being approved for essential services, that's transportation and health. And all short-term travellers are banned. We did have, and I just wanted to tell you this story to just illustrate how strictly enforced these rules are. I spoke this morning to somebody who had actually been with another person at a meeting who then tested positive. And the government tracked him down and explained that he had been in contact with the person and he was subject to a stay-at-home notice. So when he stayed at home, the government contacted him by WhatsApp 3 times a day, very early in the morning, in the middle of the day, and in the afternoon and the evening. And they asked him to give his temperature and also move around so they could see he was actually in his home. And those that breach that order can be electronically tagged under the Infectious Diseases Act. And then just to go back to the point I made right at the beginning, this new health certification that's required in Singapore is likely to be a new norm. And you might remember that actually before the crisis, the Singapore government was requiring vaccination verifications for dependent children under 12 to make sure there wasn't going to be a measles epidemic. And so I think, those messages, particularly from Asia Pac, about being very mindful of the rules, and also anticipating that there will be a lot of new processes intertwined in immigration requirements going forward are the two things I'd like you to take away. The Philippines is on a lockdown, and overnight there were announced further restrictions in Japan, and particularly anyone who's been in the UK.
Okay.
So turning to, sorry, Brian.
So before we finish on Asia, I don't know if one question I was asked last week from I think it's from Leah in Paris, was asking about Vietnam. Do you know anything about what's going on in Vietnam at the moment?
I have to be truthful and say I don't, but I can, if she'd like to email me with specific questions about Vietnam, I would be very happy to pick it up, and certainly I will pick it up next week.
Okay, thank you very much, Julia. Okay, I think you were going to go on to Middle East and Africa.
Middle East and Africa. So last week I explained that in the UAE only Emirati citizens and their immediate family could enter, and I explained that there was a hotline that you could ring for exceptional cases. We've had very little visibility of what the process is and how the government are making decisions about who is a special case. They have actually formalized the procedures in the last couple of days. But when we've looked at the questions, they're all concerning really families and compassionate cases. So that's where we think all the exceptions are being exercised. There's very strict quarantine regulations for those that are subject, and they're called move permits. And one thing, though, that is an incredible positive and a real credit to the UAE is the use of technology. And actually, not just in the UAE, but in Qatar, the technology platforms they're building across the region so quickly are really, really impressive. And that enables a semblance of normality in actually processing applications. Next week, we're going to really focus in on Africa. I'll pick Vietnam up next week, but certainly Africa, we're going to do a deeper dive on. At the moment, South Africa is subject to a lockdown, so is Ghana. So are the major cities in Nigeria, and we expect a lockdown soon in Namibia. So things are very difficult to process because, as I explained last time, it is a very paper-based process system in Africa. Moving on to the Americas, I say giving a health warning about the US. It's so important that you take proper legal advice in the US. I spoke to Bo Cooper, who heads our government consulting and sits in Washington, and he gave me a couple of broad points that he thought it would be very helpful for people to hear and to make. The first thing that he wanted me to relay was that US immigration agencies have implemented some steps to expand flexibility, but they're far behind other parts of the US government. So in the US, we've seen that government departments have relaxed dates for tax filings, some SEC reporting, even environmental agency regulations, but they have been quite slow in actually giving relaxation for immigration matters. And they do accept this, and they are trying to do something about it. We've seen some relaxation, which I talked about last time, about wet signatures, about giving more time to fill in information, responding to requests for further evidence. But generally, there needs to be some more flexibility. The US, as we discussed again last time, is very paper-based. And I think as a result of what's happened, we will find that the agency will have to change because they're realizing a paper-based system where there's a lot of face-to-face contacts is very difficult to manage, particularly in cases like this. Also, just to say that we're in H1 petition season. Those that were successful in the registration process are filing H1B petitions, but there is concern about whether people will be ready to work on 1st of October, because obviously the government will be overwhelmed with other things. So my first point really is how the government, the immigration agencies are managing. But my second point is that because the government in the US have adapted some broad flexibility for a lot of companies, companies are taking business decisions in this pandemic and taking risks which they're forgetting that they're taking. So as an example, government agencies have allowed companies to, for example, pay reduced wages as an economic response to the pandemic. And then companies think of this as an HR issue and as an employer's decision, but it could have a huge impact on H1B compliance, because obviously you have to pay a certain level of wages. The same thing applies if you're moving people onto different sites. So you've really got to consider immigration compliance. And although the Department of Labour is slow at the moment in taking up investigations, we really feel that they will resume with vigour at the end of this. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to come in there. I was looking at some of the comments we've been getting through, and one comment, I think you've started to address it, but Tom Brune from INEO, he wrote, speaking of lobbying, are there any worldwide ERC or other attendees who can provide insights to mobility interaction at the legislative level in Washington, DC? Now, I know you guys do a lot. I know Lynn was actually in the audience last week, Lynn Shotwell from ERC, and certainly I would take that up, Tom, and try and speak to Lynn or to Ed Hannibal or somebody at ERC to see whether stuff that we can do. I think it is crucially important that what we're trying to do, we do come together as an industry to help each other as far as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think ERC has been incredible in the issues that they've been taking up. Also, I would really call out SHRM. You know, they have been Rebecca Peters at SHRM, and that she has really been with a specialty panel on immigration. She's been really raising a lot of these issues, and obviously, you know, individuals such as Austin Fragomen, who's, you know, an enormous icon in this industry, has been also directly liaising. So I think it has been quite a collective approach. And I know Austin and I both sit on that specialty panel with SHRM, and I know SHRM has been liaising with ERC. So I think, you know, there is a very good community cooperative approach. And
it's interesting to see. I mean, this is one of the wonders of LinkedIn world and this way we're communicating. I just got a message through from Nuran Zarug, who heads up ERC in EMEA, and she said, "Thanks, Brian. There are initiatives on this with the government, so clearly ERC are on that, and you know we'd love to have more involvement. See what we can do to help as an industry." A couple of other points have come up. I've got. Uganda is on lockdown. That's the point that someone's made, presumably based in Uganda. Petra Vallet has said, I'm not sure to which country they're referring, but the comment is, what about expiring work permits where employees cannot return?
Yes, well, that's a really excellent point. And the thing is that it just depends from country to country. So in fact, someone asked me that yesterday, and it really does depend. You have to really, really look down very deeply to each country, because there's very few countries in the world that give automatic extensions. Most countries, you actually have to make some form of application. And if you don't make that application, then there are quite serious consequences. We actually, on the Fragomen Way website, which we refer to, which we are giving to everybody to look at, which we're keeping updated with information 20 of 24 hours a day, we've actually highlighted the countries where it's automatic, but they are very few and far between. So it's very important to find out country by country and comply with that process.
We are getting a lot of very positive comments coming through on LinkedIn. I just see Mike McNamara here, tremendous insights, Julia, a lot of other people saying, similar things, thanks for hosting, this is so great. Specific questions, I'm not going to ask you to address them now because I'm conscious that we're going to run out of time and we need to go to our guests and get a corporate perspective as well. But people have been asking about Indonesia, about Saudi Arabia, about Myanmar. We'll try and come back to those next week. Or if you email Julia with specific comments, I'm sure she'll come back to you. Someone's asked about insights on Germany, which I think just brings us on to the fact we were going to talk about Europe next.
Yes.
So if we can spend just a few minutes on Europe, and then we'll try and get the corporate's perspective with Bill from Arab and Tim from IBM.
Absolutely. So if you recall last week in Europe, there were two things that I wanted to highlight. The fact that there was this travel ban in the EU, but it was really, really important to look individually at each country because each country is responsible for its own border. And the second thing is not to forget compliance and not to forget posted worker notification compliance if you're moving people around. Now, as an update from last week, we've had a lot of success in making exceptional cases in individual countries for allowing people through the border. And we've also had a lot of success in getting exceptional permission for those people to work. So I just really want to reiterate the message that don't stop at looking at the overall EU travel ban. Do a deep dive into each country, and it is possible for them to exercise discretion. And then the second thing I wanted to say is about Germany, is Germany does seem, when you're looking around the whole of Europe, slightly ahead of the game in terms of getting things under control. And the way it does look at the moment, it does seem that that Germany will be probably first, well, it looks as if they might be first back to a bit of normality, which does go back into this whole thing that we discussed, Brian, last week about planning for remobilizations, remobilizing strategies, using things like the intra-company transferee directive and moving people to one country in Europe and then moving them on from there. And we talked last week about the Netherlands because it had such a good immigration system, but it also is worth people keeping an eye on what's happening in various different countries. And the very last thing I want to say before I just finish is quickly about the UK. Last week, I explained that there had been, just before we went on air, this new policy where if your visa expires in the UK before the 31st of May, you can make a simple email application, explain the position, get an acknowledgement and approval until the 31st of May. And we also discussed the fact you could do in-country switching. The big news on the UK is that since last week, the Home Office has issued guidance on right to work checks. And that really was in line with what people had been thinking, which was, do your best, do Skype, and, try and keep with immigration compliance but also balance with reasonableness. But also the government has issued an assurance that they won't prejudice people who are having difficulty because of COVID-19. And the final point I'm going to say, which is really important, is that there was a Home Office call on Friday, and they have clarified that Tier 2 workers can participate in the 80% government payment scheme, and it's not regarded as a benefit. So that's really, really important for those assignees that are here. Thank you, Brian.
Okay, well, thank you, Julia. And again, a complete tour de force, and the comments that come up in LinkedIn are just echoing that. One comment from Patricia Tavares. I know old friend of mine, Patricia, heads up the mobility program for the Americas at Unilever, says important to mention LATAM. Many countries are totally locked down partially. I think we'll try and cover that more next week. And indeed, Patricia, if at some point you want to come on the show, we'd love to have your expertise too. But what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the response to the crisis. And what I'd like to do is to bring in our guests. As I said, we've got Tim Potter here from IBM and Jill Pawley from Arup. But Tim, let's just start with you, if I may. I appreciate that IBM has got, obviously it's one of the most well-known brands in the world and has got one of the most extensive and well-known mobility programs in the world. Can you just say a little bit about what you guys have done in response to the crisis, and give us, whatever you can. Appreciate a lot of things are sensitive, but whatever you can share with us to what's going on in your world.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thanks, Julia, for those updates. I find those so valuable every time you take us through them. But Brian, to answer your question, we took several steps, and probably as we took these steps, one of our primary focuses was to ensure the health and safety of our employees, clients, partners, and our community that we work in. And so as we took these steps, that was what we had in mind, kind of at the forefront of everything we're doing. But we put together, one of the first things we did is realize communication is vital throughout this kind of constantly changing landscape. So we quickly put together, a team of people to keep employees informed. I mean, we received updates from our chairman, regular updates from our chief medical officer, and we deliver these updates through various channels throughout IBM. So communication has been real important to keep people updated about the fast changing situation. One of the other things we quickly realized was important was we really put a focus on identifying the needs of our people that are traveling and that were somewhere when this situation started to develop. And so we put together a team across IBM to really identify where people were at and gain understanding of what they may need. So that may be housing, or to extend a stay, to get someone home, to provide them immigration services. So there's a whole thing of benefits or kind of needs that these employees have, and we work really quickly to identify that and work very closely with our vendors to provide these services to our employees throughout the situation. Brian, I think you're on mute. I'm not sure we can hear you.
I'm so sorry. I'm a rubbish presenter. I was on mute, but thank you for letting me know, Tim. Jill, I just wanted to know, from our perspective, could you just tell us a little bit about, what you guys are doing? And I appreciate that you're an employee-owned company, aren't you? So
yes, we are. Yes. So
different.
Very similar stance to Tim and IBM, that critically our employees, our members, and our clients were front of face with everything. We very quickly moved from working in an office environment to working from home. So that involved our IT team rushing out lots of tech that none of us had ever used before. So we were very, very quickly all able to work from home. We did some testing very early on by sending out a certain number of offices to work from home at one time to make sure that the system didn't crash around us. That all worked really well. So we were able to very quickly have everybody working from home, so that we didn't need to come into the office. We set up a global steering committee that talks 2 or 3 times a week every morning, and we have a very sophisticated cascade approach to communications. We have a COVID hub on our intranet, which is updated daily with any up-to-date actions and messages. Lots of really useful information on there. And we from a mobility perspective, we very quickly identified who we had where. We took action to see in the most immediate date lines everybody that was on assignment until the end of June. We contacted all of those and worked out plans for them, whether they would stay, whether they would go, whether they would, looking obviously at their immigration status as well. So a number of different things, but we were able to get that up and going very, very quickly.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Again, looking at the comments, one comment that came through from Mary Joseph. She said, "Thank you, Julia. It was very insightful. Brian, can we hear more of the subsidies granted due to the COVID situation by various governments around the world?" Now, that's not an area that I feel comfortable on commenting on personally. What we'll try and do is maybe get somebody on, maybe from a tax firm or something. If there's anybody out there from one of the tax firms who'd like to be on the show in another week, we'll get somebody in. But I don't know whether anybody else has got experience with what any other governments around the world might be doing to help, in terms of, I'm not trying to hear immigration, I'm talking here about subsidies and grants.
In terms of subsidies and grants?
Yeah, to employees.
Is that the question?
Yeah, maybe we'll leave that for another week then. But we've taken the comment on board, and we will come back another week on that. Now, what I do want to do though is I want to get onto a very specific question. I think many people, we've all got stranded employees, and so for example, I know some of the tech companies will have a lot of, say, Indian employees who want to get back home but are finding it difficult because borders are closed. I don't know whether Tim or Jill, you could talk a little bit about what you're doing with helping to repatriate employees back home. I mean, normally when there's a crisis, the problem is getting people out of the country where they are. These days, the problem might actually be getting them into the country that they've got to get to, as well as getting them out of where they are. But Tim, Jill, could either of you talk to what you might be doing in terms of, maybe start with you, Tim, first,
Sure.
in terms of helping to repatriate employees?
This was really unprecedented for, to run into a situation where our India travelers couldn't get back home. And we worked really closely with the employee themselves. We have teams on the ground that were in contact with the employee, the managers, our HR teams. And the first step was just to make sure that the employee felt safe and knew that we were working on their situation. And the next step we took is really we leveraged our vendors and made sure that we got their involvement and worked up a plan to either get the employee someplace safe in the country they're at, or if possible, actually get them back to India if that became a possible situation. And we just worked really closely with the employees throughout the whole time and stayed connected.
Yeah, very similar to Tim again. As I say, we focused on the people who were on assignment and whose assignments were due to end until at the end of June, and we talked to all of those. Some of them wanted to hang around a bit longer, and we managed to persuade them that now would be a good time to go home early. And that was a good move because the borders started to close, and then they realised that they wouldn't have been able to have gone home anyway. People's right to work was expiring, and although the UKVI stepped in there a bit, we didn't know that at the time. We also have people that we thought would want to repatriate back to their home location who actually have decided to stay. They reckon that because of their personal situation, they're very comfortable where they are. And so we've taken that on board as well. We haven't forced any repatriations, but we've just taken pragmatic approaches to things, really.
Okay, another question I want to discuss is that, we're all used to dealing with a fairly fast-changing landscape, in our lives. I mean, tax laws tend to change, quite often once a year, and if you're dealing with, 100 countries or so, then you're always going to be getting changes, pretty regularly, at least once or twice a month you're going to find changes. And similarly, immigration and visa rules tend to change quite often. And you get all those, and then you get emergencies. I don't think any of us have ever seen anything like this in terms of the sheer pace of change, of things changing so much, not just day by day, but in some cases hour by hour. How are you managing, is my question. I suppose, we are in this incredibly fast changing landscape. How are we managing, I don't know whether, Tim or Jill, you want to sort of kick off on, how you're even starting to keep up to date?
Yeah, I think Joe mentioned, when at the beginning there that they put together a team that meets several times a week, and IBM really has done the same thing. We put together kind of a response team that meets regularly to understand what's changing. We have provided 24-hour support for our employees and managers. So if something comes up, we action it as quickly as possible. And our vendors have been very supportive too, and provided that same level of support. And so it's just really stayed connected, stayed organized, and we quickly put plans in place to make sure we had teams available, and we're tracking the updates as they came across.
Yeah, and as I said, we have a very good cascade system. So our group management board are meeting very regularly. They feed back into the region board that feeds back into all of us. And then we have a bottom-up approach as well. So when we need to look at certain things that have implications for people's tier 2 visas that maybe the board aren't necessarily familiar with, they're able to take those comments on board as well. So it's very much we've taken the attitude that over communication is fine at the moment, because you probably can't communicate too much.
Okay, and some of the comments that are coming through, just to let you know, regarding the question on tax that I raised, Yuki Watanabe says, I know Canada, Mexico, and Japan are extending filing payment deadlines. And to help our cash flow, we're shifting tax payment filing accordingly. That might be something that is something we'll try and pick up on in another week or so's time. People have asked about, what are you doing with ongoing assignments? I think we'll come on to that in a moment about what the future is in assignments. And then some very specific questions about what are people doing with per diems and things like COLA for long-term employers. I don't know if that's anything that people feel they can comment on, or maybe that's something we'll try and pick up on later. Certainly it's not anything I can talk to. Is that anything you've had experience on, Jill?
So with our per diems, we actually just reached agreement today that if somebody's in a forced situation where they can't leave the country, then we would continue to pay those for them.
Okay.
Actually, I took part in a call earlier this week with a group of global mobility leaders, and there was a very nice conversation about how resilient some of the assignees had been, and how thoughtful they'd been about, for example, if they had to come back to the UK and they were worried about families that were living in their houses, and they wanted to protect those people and just themselves move into rented accommodation. And she said that one person actually said, oh, and they wrote to HR and said, and I presume I have to give up my COLA. So, I think that, the assignees themselves are being generally very understanding about the situation.
Okay, thank you. And Yuki Watanabe again, thanks for your insight, Yuki. Yuki is the Global Mobility Director at the GAP. And she said that they are not making any changes on allowances on their COLA or per diems. Yuki, just a big shout out to you and indeed to other Global Mobility Directors. If anybody would like to be on this show, we're looking for guests each week. Just do send us a message, and we'll try and get you on the show in another week or so's time. So what I'd like to do now is maybe just move on the debate onto the discussion onto another issue, which is, what does the future start looking like? I mean, when will the market move again, or has it indeed completely stopped? I mean, maybe people are still sending people on assignment. I think, Tim, from your perspective at IBM, you are still sending people on assignment?
Obviously the landscape has changed, right? And so it's forced a lot of people to work from home, and we've accommodated that, to make sure that IBM is still moving forward with delivering on our commitments. And so, when will the market move again? I guess it's a big unknown, but I think from our perspective is we're still working hard for our clients and partners and making sure that we haven't slowed down. And we've leveraged technology and tools and made sure that people can keep delivering on the work that we're doing.
And that's very much the same. As I said, we're open for business. We've carried on, and we're in touch with our clients. And I think the speed at which technology has been rolled out to us and the way that we're using it now has been admirable for everybody, because I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, we never thought we'd be working in this environment. And so, in terms of moving forward, I think there's a big question mark about what mobility might look like going forward, because now we realise that we don't need to be in the same room. It's preferable, but we don't need to be. And I think it will force us to review how we work. And I remember listening to a GP talking about how they've been forced into that situation as well, because they do so much more online assessment now of people, and thinking actually maybe that's the way forward. It's a very similar environment that I think we take stock from all of this and have a look and see what opportunities there are for us to work in a different way.
I think one of the things you have to realize is whether you're in an office or at home, communication and connections are key. And I think we're all realizing this as we're separated and out of the office right now. In many instances, we're finding new ways to connect and making sure that line of communication stays open. And so that's, regular meetings throughout the day. We have stand-ups with each other. We're staying closely connected. And I think that that's only going to benefit us in the future as everything starts to improve. That those new ways of connecting will just benefit us as everything comes back to normal.
I think we've looked at even people like our new hires, even graduates and apprentices. I think we were concerned to start with about how we would bring them into the business, but we've been able to be very creative then about how we onboard people, different options for them, how we can look after them, make sure that they feel part of our when they join. So it's just pushed our boundaries in a way that we hadn't anticipated, but in the way that the same way that the government have relaxed the rules on the right to work checks in the UK, that there could be good things that come out of this.
Yeah, just looking at some of the comments as well, just going back to that point on COLA and per diems, Nelly Le Breton has said, ECA have written a blog on COLA review in the current climate. So I presume that's somewhere on the ECA website, so shout out to them. And then a question from Des McKell, who is the Regional Director for NetExpat. He says, have you been providing any additional coaching support to lock down expat families during this challenging time to mitigate the risk of failed or early repatriations once life has normalised? I'd be quite interested in everybody out there in LinkedIn world, if you can sort of just feed in and let Des know whether that's something that has been going on. I don't know whether many companies are sort of are more sort of just in crisis mode. And I don't know. Is that anything, Jill, that's been on your agenda?
Yeah, actually, our learning and development team have launched a new module under our learning and development program, which is all about working from home, resilience, hints and tips, well-being. We have a very robust wellbeing program anyway. We're looking at introducing things like online yoga sessions, mindfulness apps that are very Arabized, and just also directing people. We have an employee assistance program. I'm sure probably everybody does, but just making sure that people understand that they're different options. But as I said, we've just created very quickly our own module for working at home and all the different challenges that brings with it.
Could I just say quickly, the things that Des does and his team at NetExpat are pretty awesome. And some of that really individual coaching is really, really needed now to deal with split families. So, because of the situation, for example, in, Singapore, the UAE, it's really, and China, really difficult situations where you have inadvertently split families and you have your assignee working and the family are on their own. So I think some some of his special coaching is really much needed in some cases.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Well said, Julia.
I just want to jump in. IBM has they've provided so many resources to the employees to support in learning, health and wellness, in the community in general. There's been a lot of resources available, pulled out to IBMers throughout this time, so we feel very supported.
Excellent. I mean, there's clearly a lot going on. I mentioned it at the outset, but I'll probably mention it again, is that, we at Benivo have launched a tool where everybody can share information, and we're very happy to offer that completely free of charge to, whilst this crisis is going on, to any company, whether they're a client of ours or not. So, if you want to have a tool to share that sort of information, and any service provider that wants to put information in there, whether it's cultural information, immigration information, tax immigration, just let us know and we will feed your information into that platform. So that's our commitment to the industry. But let's just get on to this whole question of the future global mobility landscape. What do we think it's going to look like then? The world, I suppose, even when we come out of this particular nightmare, is going to be in a level of post-traumatic stress. And I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of learnings that we've learned about technology, about ways of working, virtual working. How do we think that the crisis is going to affect global mobility in the medium and maybe in the long term? I don't know who wants to kick off on that one.
I think, there'll be a lot of planning around making sure that you have plans in place to make sure work can continue as situations unfold. And IBM's been really good about that since the beginning. Is we've had a lot of plans in place really quickly, and our work wasn't interrupted. We just kept going. And I think the future of mobility, I think, will return to somewhat of a normalcy with travel continuing. We'll still need to send people across the world, and people will need to be at client sites and data centers, and we need to be prepared to get them there.
I think Tim raises a really good point, though, about preparedness for a crisis, because I think a lot of people's crisis management plan involved there being a situation in Asia, then everyone could come back to Europe, and then obviously the situation then developing in Europe, that plan had to be put on the side. So I think there will be an enormous review of crisis management plans of every company.
I agree.
Okay, well, maybe let's move on to, we're getting towards the end of our session. There's another area I'd like to talk about, which is working remotely. I was just wondering, working remotely, people always used to like to do that. I don't know whether people are now getting a bit stir crazy and actually wanting to go back into the office. But, but what are people's views on working remotely these days?
I think it's something that, for the safety of many people, it's something that's you're required to do right now. And the things I've seen across IBM is people have stayed positive. We've worked together, we've stayed connected, and we've leveraged the tools that are available to us to make sure that our work's not impacted. I think one of the big challenges that working remotely in this situation is thrown into everyone is that many of us have families here now also that would normally be in school or daycare or somewhere else. So there's a balance that we recognize is going on, and we're working with each other and supporting each other and making sure that we're accommodating schedules and just staying connected.
And I think there is another element to working remotely as well, because we've found ourselves, I'm sure like so many other companies, where we have people in locations where we hadn't expected them to be, whether they've been on leave and then suddenly they're stuck in a country where they can't get back from. And so they're finding themselves in a situation where they want to work remotely, but they might not have the tools and accessibility to do that. And then it comes back to our favourite subject of permanent establishments and corporate tax and social security that cause issues as well. So slightly different take on what working remotely can look like. In terms of connectivity, I think generally speaking, people, we're a very team-based environment. We work very much on personal relationships within Arup. So it's really important that we stay really engaged with each other and really engaged with our clients during this time. And again, going back to it's pushed our boundaries because we're not used to working in this particular way.
Okay, and what about from your perspective, Julia? I mean, how do you see working remotely happening in a law firm or indeed with your clients?
Yes, I mean, I think for everyone, and it's a sort of surprise how well we can all work from home. But I think essentially people do miss other people and that face-to-face interaction. And I think that the future will be that perhaps there'll be more emphasis on the cost benefits of different assignments. There'll be much more regard to looking at the data analytics of how likely these assignments that you're making, because they're going to be very costly, are going to be effective. But I think, as Tim and Jill said, people will still be traveling and working, overseas as well.
Okay, so thank you all very much. Just looking at the comments, again, loads and loads of comments out there. And for those of you who are out there, again, do please share this. We want to get this shared as widely as possible. Somebody asked, they said they joined 15 minutes late, and where can they hear the beginning? This will be, once this recording is finished, it will be on LinkedIn for you to access at any time. It's also on the Benivo YouTube channel and will be posted to our website as well at some later point. So as soon as this broadcast is finished, you'll be able to watch it all again, the repeat. We, of course, will be back here next week. And thank you all for your comments. They've been really helpful, really insightful. We will try and pick up on as many of those comments as we can next week. And we'll be back, Julia and I will be back next week with some other special guests. We're just working on whether they might be governmental sources, they might be practitioners, they might be other people on the service side, but we're working on that. But you'll know about it in the next couple of days, exactly who's coming on the show next week. But do mark it in your calendars, 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. Eastern time next week. Also, a number of people have been contacting me during the show to find out more about the COVID support tool that Benivo are offering for free. If you're interested, just do either approach me via LinkedIn, or indeed we're going to run our own effective workshop on this on next Tuesday at 4 p.m. UK time, so that's 11 a.m. Eastern, where we're going to live demo the tool, but also we undertake that if there's something that you want the tool to do for your company, we will get that up and running for you, and we've set ourselves a deadline of 3 working days to get it up and running for you. So if it's of interest, either come on that webcast next Tuesday or simply message me. But all that really ends, because we are out of time, is I want to do a big thank to our guests, to Tim Potter from IBM and to Jill Pawley from Arup. So on behalf of Julia and me and everybody else in the global mobility industry, a big hats off to you, Tim and Jill. We really appreciate having you on the show. I think the whole world is pulling together now, and you guys sharing like this is so appreciated. So thank you both.
Okay. You're welcome. Thanks, Brian, for having us.
Okay, and thank you, Julia, for co-hosting with me. And we look forward to all seeing you, as I said, same time, same place next week. So goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.